Aloha, everybody, and good morning. On behalf of the Hawaii EV Association, our partners, Blue Planet Foundation and Drive Electric Hawaii, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, The Future of Electric Vehicles in Hawaii. This webinar is part of our National Drive Electric Week celebration. This is an annual event presented by Plug-in America, Sierra Club, and the Electric Auto Association. And we've been celebrating across the state this past week. We had EV 101, this webinar that took place last weekend, and I promise we'll get that video out to all of you. We had a successful EV caravan in Kauai, thanks to Sonia and her team. And Blue Planet had EV Trivia Night, which I missed, but apparently was a lot of fun. Additionally, just proud to announce that Mayors Kawakami, Victorino, and Kim, as well as Governor Ige, proclaimed September 26th through October 4th, Drive Electric Week across Hawaii. Yay. My name is Noel Marin. I lead Hawaii EV Association. We're a group that was established just recently. We're the Hawaii chapter of the Electric Auto Association. And that's a national organization that was established in '67 to increase the adoption of EVs across the US. We are a grassroots, all volunteer and nonprofit group, and our members are also part of a number of clubs across the state. Kauai EV, Tesla Hawaii Club, and also Big Island EV Association. We're trying to get clubs formed or established as well in the, on Maui, as well as Oahu. I want to say that we have several hundred EV owners across the state, and we welcome anyone who owns an EV, is curious about EVs, or is considering getting one. If you're looking for to get involved in creating a more sustainable future for Hawaii, looking into getting an EV, join us. I'd like to spend a few moments to introduce my colleagues. So several of my colleagues, and folks, as I introduce you, just briefly turn on your camera, who've worked really hard to make this event, and actually the event's a reality. Nanette Finton is our treasurer. She's also president and founder of the Tesla Hawaii Club, which was established in 2013. Nanette drives a Tesla Model X. Director Bill Bugbee is a vocal advocate for renewable energy and sustainable transportation. He owns and manages Beyond Kona, an up-and-coming online publication, and he drives a Chevy Volt as well as a Tesla Model S. Director Sonia Cass is president of Kauai EV, and Sonia's doing great work on the Garden Isle. She was actually honored as the Woman of the Year by the Electric Auto Association last year, and she drives a Nissan Leaf. And then finally, Director Tam Hunt is an attorney and an author in the renewable energy field. Tam drives a Chevy Bolt. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge Lauren Reichelt of Blue Planet Foundation for her contributions over the past couple of weeks. It's been a lot of hard work, but you know, thanks to her and the rest of the team, we're able to make it happen. Lastly, I will be your Zoom host today. And I should say that Zoom does require a lot of manual and mental dexterity, perhaps that of an AI-powered robot, which I'm not. Therefore, I ask for your patience and grace as we navigate through this technology today. Our mission is to accelerate the transition to clean, sustainable transportation. We do this through advocacy, through education, and through the support of the build out of charging infrastructure. We essentially exist to help others make the shift from gas to electric. Now, last week in our EV 101 webinar, we discussed the many benefits of the electric car and how it can empower everyday people to make a difference in our environment. And I'd like to now share a clip that illustrates how the electric drivetrain is actually making a difference in countless other ways. And I want to transition here to a video. Okay, I want to get back to our slide here. So, what do you think? Is it amazing to see how many forms there are? I was quite amazed when I did the search for what was electrified out there, and I'm pretty sure there are other form factors, devices, equipment that utilize gasoline or diesel that are over time going to be transitioned over to electric. So I hope you agree that the efficient and powerful electric drivetrain offers us the opportunity to wean ourselves from fossil fuel. It's not going to be easy, but it's clear that given the pace of innovation that we will eventually get there. It is now with great pleasure that I announce the main reason for us being here today. We've got a terrific panel of local leaders who are involved in paving the way to our clean energy and clean transportation future. Each of them in their own special way is addressing critical barriers to the transition to a sustainable future, and I'd like to now welcome them. By the way, before I do that, I failed to mention earlier that during the course of our day here, and this is for our audience, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose, please put that in the chat. So if you hover over your Zoom window, there should be a little chat icon on the bottom. If you click on that, you should be able to submit a question. If you can include, if it's directed to a specific individual, if you could include that in your question, that would be great. So today we have Lauren Reichelt, Clean Transportation Director at Blue Planet Foundation, Aki Marceau, Director, Electrification of Transportation at Hawaiian Electric, Beth Tokioka, Communication Manager at Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, Riley Saito, Hawaii County R&D Deputy Director, Melissa Miyashiro, Managing Director for Strategy and Policy at Blue Planet Foundation, Nicole Lowen, State Representative for District 6 and Chair of for the House Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. Russell Rudderman is also going to be joining us at about 10 o'clock, and he's a state senator representing Puna and Ka'u. To our panel, thank you very much for your leadership and work. I'm excited to hear what you have to share today, and I'm sure many of us are. I'd like to now turn this over to our moderator, Bill Bugbee.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us, taking part of your Saturday morning to learn about how we're advancing the adoption of electric vehicles here in the state of Hawaii. But before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank my fellow volunteers at Hawaii Electric Association, specifically Nanette, Sonia, Tam, and Noel. Really a virtual event with more technology and moving parts, in my opinion, than a NASA moon launch. A very special thanks to Noel, who, like the Wizard of Oz, is the man behind the curtain who has enabled the very many moving parts to work together, both people and technology. And I'd like to ask each of you if you could please mute your mic if you're not presenting to provide a clear audio for the presenters. You know, these are really exciting times we're living in. Costs are dropping not only with EVs, but also clean energy. Recently, a leader in the area of clean energy and electrification is the state of California. It's, as a nation state, the 6th largest economy in the world. And it announced, as governor announced last week, their intention to phase out internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035, which is about 10 years ahead of our own state's RPS for advancing renewable energy. The announcement's not only good news for advancing zero emission vehicles, but also for clean energy as well, because it is a win for both the auto industry and the electric grid in driving market towards a clean, distributed, and resilient future, and a positive economic ripple effect for the entire nation. California set the standard for low emissions vehicles, and 13 states have followed. And the state has also developed the first emissions testing, statewide testings program. And finally, due to California's rather stringent pollution regulations, it's forced auto companies to see the light when it comes to electric vehicles. And although we had kind of an aborted start with GM's introduction of the EV1 back in the 1990s, where we are today, advancing 20 years later, is quite remarkable. So I'd like to begin today with our first speaker, and Lauren from Blue Planet. Blue Planet is one of Hawaii's leading environmental organizations, which has been instrumental in guiding the state's transformation to a sustainable future. And Lauren will be sharing her organization's ideas on sustainability and how that can play out here in Hawaii. Thank you. Lauren?
Perfect. Great. So electric vehicles are clearly an important part of our decarbonization strategy, but they're not a solution for everyone, and they're not a silver bullet to our transportation woes or our energy woes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about I'm going to take a more macro view of the transportation system before the rest of this session dives more deeply into electric vehicles as one solution for our transportation and energy challenges. So with that, I think it's helpful to start by considering what our current transportation system looks like right now. Right now, 2/3 of our imported petroleum goes to transportation in Hawaii, and half of that ends up being consumed in ground transportation. So this, of course, increases our reliance on imports and contributes to climate change, which is going to have devastating effects on Hawaii's reefs, beaches, our economy, and it's going to make us more susceptible to weather events like hurricanes. But the greenhouse gas emissions and negative environmental benefits of cars and trucks aren't the only negative impacts that we see from transportation. We also see a lower quality of life and lower health outcomes as we waste all of our days in traffic. We see traffic fatalities, and we see more and more area being taken up by vehicles in the form of expanded roads and giant, often empty parking structures or parking lots. So a clean transportation system needs to address all of those things, and EVs are a piece of that solution, but they can't be a full answer. A true clean transportation system requires a network of solutions that are clean, accessible, and safe. Noelle, we can go to the next slide, please. So when we talk about clean energy, we talk first about using energy efficiency to reduce the amount of energy that we're using in the first place, and then we replace the remaining energy use with renewable energy. Transportation is similar. We want to first reduce the amount that we drive overall by replacing car travel with alternatives like walking, biking, public transit, carpooling, the less energy intensive modes of travel. And then the remaining miles that simply have to be taken in a car should be replaced with more sustainable transportation technologies and fuels like electric vehicles, biodiesel, or renewably produced hydrogen, for example. You'll mostly be hearing about, of course, this replace piece, the electric vehicle technologies that can be plugged in, because of course it's National Drive Electric Week, but both pieces are really important. So I'm actually going to focus on the vehicle miles traveled reduction, or the reduce part of the puzzle this morning. Next slide, please. So to reduce vehicle miles traveled, you have to create a strong multimodal system of options to encourage people to shift away from their cars. A person would utilize a variety of modes depending on the day or the specific trip. For example, someone might walk to the bus stop and then take the bus to the rail station and then take rail to town for work. Options like car share should be available in communities so that someone could not own a car, but when they need to take a big grocery trip, they could just use car share for the afternoon. And that frees people up to feel like they don't have to have a car. Sidewalks and bike lanes need to be accessible and safe, and public transit needs to be efficient. And by creating that system, single occupancy vehicles won't need to be the default. But Americans are really reliant on their cars, more so than Europeans, for example. We can actually go back. I'm not quite ready yet, but in part because we built our cities around cars and didn't invest as heavily into public transportation systems or biking and walking infrastructure. So in order to break some of the stigma around biking or taking the bus, and to make those options more efficient and safe, and therefore more attractive, it's really important that cities invest in improved infrastructure. Now we can go to the next one. So one piece of that is more walkable communities. Walking is the least carbon intensive of any transportation mode, and we want people to feel comfortable walking out their front door and down the street. So this is actually a map of Makiki on Oahu and Honolulu, and these are all the sidewalks that are missing in this community. And by filling these types of infrastructure gaps, we can actually encourage more active and less carbon intensive transportation. Next slide. And if we want people to feel comfortable, this is bulb outs, an image of what's called a bulb out, which can create more space for pedestrians on the roads and shorten the distance they need to cross the road, which again can increase walkability in a community. Next. And if we want people to feel comfortable biking, we need to build dedicated bicycling infrastructure that actually separates bikes from cars. The more connectivity we can create, the more people will see bikes as a viable option. Next. Sorry, I'm moving really fast through this. 10 minutes is short, guys. And then along with that is density. If we develop in a sprawl pattern or in suburban developments like we see here, people are forced to drive to the salon, they're forced to drive to the grocery store or their job because there's no services that are nearby the residential area. Next. But alternatively, if we can build more multi-use compact developments, other options become more viable. People might be able to bike to work and walk to the grocery store. People can start to interact with their communities more and their neighbors more. Cars don't have to be the default then. And cars cost up around $10,000 a year to own and operate. So that can also save families money, help to reduce traffic and dedicated parking space, and allow people to get healthier and of course, at the bottom of it all, use less energy because they're swapping out their car for, an electric bike, for example. Let's go to the next slide. We also need buses that are renewably powered, like electric buses that can be charged from a renewable electricity grid, and bus routes that feed into a public transit backbone. Which in our case would be the new rail system on Oahu, which rail will also inevitably be renewably powered as well. But buses, of course, are more efficient than a single occupancy vehicle. Per person, it's a lot lower energy use. Next. And Blue Planet advocates for these types of infrastructure improvements and policies to adjust the way that we develop. We also run programs to expose people to more alternative modes of transportation, like the Oahu Commute Challenge that we ran in February of this last year, where we challenged 140 Honolulu employees to switch up their commutes for a month. And it's really important to create these positive experiences as we're building out the infrastructure alongside that. I think in a really simplified way, the biggest barriers to increased mode shift are in parts, slow allocation of funding to infrastructure projects, the actual execution of those projects. Development that prioritizes cars over people is sort of an underpinning issue in American development in general, but it exists here as well. And a lack of positive experiences with these modes. And they're all closely related, and Blue Planet and the Sustainable Transportation Coalition of Hawaii are working from multiple angles to improve that system. And we encourage those funding allocations and policies to make a safer, more convenient, active and public transit system. I also kind of want to address this. I have, I think, a couple more minutes or maybe a minute more, but I know we're here to talk about electric vehicles. And so some of you might be saying, why do we even have to worry about this? Why can't we just replace all gas cars with electric cars? And there are a couple of points that I think are important there. Cars are becoming more efficient and we can power them by electricity, but people are also buying more cars and they're driving them longer distances. So by investing in these other more sustainable modes and developing our communities in ways that encourage utilization of them, we can actually help to stem demand growth for driving. And then also, if we imagine a Hawaii where 100% of the vehicles are replaced with electric vehicles, Transcending Oil, a report commissioned by Elemental Accelerator, showed that if all vehicles, 100% of our vehicles were replaced with electric vehicles, we would require 33% more electricity production than the baseline load of all the other sectors. So a strong multimodal transportation system can also help alleviate that energy burden. And then lastly, my last point is EVs unfortunately don't address many of the other issues that we see due to high rates of car ownership. So there's still cars, which can typically add a lot of money to a family's budget. So that doesn't necessarily address the equity and access issue around transportation. They also don't help us move more people more efficiently. which can help reduce traffic and negative health outcomes and the livability just associated with that. They don't help us to engage more meaningfully with our communities the way that some of these other modes can, and they don't help us get outside more. So it's not that EVs aren't an integral piece of our clean energy transition. They're so, so important. I've been promoting National Drive Electric Week all week. And it's a big part of the work that we do at Blue Planet Foundation, and Melissa will talk more about that as well. But I just wanted to put this multimodal perspective out there. EVs aren't a silver bullet on their own, and we'll need a combination of solutions to help create our clean transportation future. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Lauren. I found your one slide on sidewalks particularly interesting. It's something that's gets often ignored. You know, when we think about redesigning cities and going through the really major reinventing our infrastructure, you know, those are tall orders which can be done over time, but something as simple as adding sidewalks can really enable not only a neighborhood, but you know, the easiest mobility that takes no fuel at all, which is walking. So I think it's a very low cost way to help us get control of our carbon emissions and at the same time link our neighborhoods together. So thank you for your presentation. It was very good.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak and join you all today.
Fantastic. Our next presenter, Aki, is from Hawaiian Electric. Hawaiian Electric's our primary utility here in the state. It serves 3 of the state's 4 island counties. And, you know, we're in this kind of unique position here in Hawaii where every county is kind of like a state, and Oahu is sort of like the, if you will, the federal government. Each of these islands has its own individual issues and geographies and populations and challenges. And so if you are a grid operator, like you are on the mainland, you interconnect with other grid operators, and therefore you have this sort of redundancy and reliancy at the same time on the larger national grid, or if you will, geographically connected grid. The challenge for Hawaii Electric is been one where each individual island is its own isolated grid, and therefore there's a lot of replication of asset and resources that cannot be shared otherwise. They've done a very good job, but their historic relationship with clean energy and the EV community has not always been a smooth ride. With the potential acquisition by NextEra, which is now a historic footnote, the statewide 100% renewable energy mandate is closing in on our utility, on our primary utility. And our audience looks forward to learning more about Hawaiian Electric, its plans to facilitate the state's transition to a emissions-free transportation grid, as well as an electric grid that powers that transportation grid. So Aki, could you please tell us a little bit more about Hawaiian Electric?
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I think before, my focus is going to be more on the replace side of things, but I do want to make a nod to the topic that Lauren covered, which is the reduce aspect of it. And as she was speaking, I was thinking about all the great work that's been going on in Honolulu specifically. So currently, there's going to be a dedicated bus lane on King Street that's under construction right now. So that'll help improve bus transportation. And then also they've been spending some time building out our bike grid. So recently on Pensacola Street, there was a bike lane that was built and established. So it's been really exciting to see the state and the counties really focusing on that reduce aspect of it. And I currently, as you can see, I'm sitting in my home. I live in Kaimuki, and that is one of Hawaii's first streetcar suburbs. It was actually designed around a transit system. And so we've done this before, we can do it again. And it's really exciting to see kind of the tide shift more in that direction. But I'm not necessarily here to talk about that, although it is one of my passions. Again, I'm Aki Marceau. I'm the Director of Electrification of Transportation for Hawaiian Electric. And I'm going to start off with a video because I actually just joined the company about 6 months ago. And so this kind of goes into the work that we're doing, and then also some of the early days of me joining the company.
One of the first things I did when I joined Hawaiian Electric is buy an electric vehicle. I've been able to understand the needs of our ideal customers better. The eMob team, short for e-mobility, has been laser focused on developing a suite of different rates and programs to help our commercial and bus customers. One of the things that we're doing is developing an electric bus make-ready infrastructure pilot program, as well as a commercial infrastructure pilot program and some rates focused on high-capacity customers and commercial customers. Make-ready only means that we're able to do infrastructure work on the utility side of the meter as well as the customer side of the meter. So in the case of electric vehicles, it allows us to work beyond the meter through the circuit breaker panels and up until the charging station. This enables our bus customers and our commercial customers to more easily transition their fleets to electric vehicles. If you're interested in learning more and following our progress, please check the website at www.hawaiianelectric.com.
All right, that was somewhat of an experiment. We weren't sure if that video was going to work, but it's good to see everything moving forward smoothly. So thanks for sharing that. I wanted to provide a little bit of context. And so first and foremost, happy National Drive Electric Week, everyone. And Noel, the Hawaii EV Association, thank you so much for providing me with the opportunity to present with such esteemed panelists today. This movement is really going to require a lot of partnerships and many folks, as we can see, kind of moving in the same direction. And I want to kind of highlight how historic a moment we're in right now. This is one of the greatest transformation in the transportation sector since Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the National Highway Act. And that did many great things. It connected communities and cities across the country. Gosh, it was before statehood. It created opportunities for freight transportation at unprecedented levels. It created a lot of jobs, especially after World War II. So there was many great aspects to that moment in history. And we're kind of at a similar crux in the road. There were a lot of challenges with that particular moment. There was some devastation of communities and displacement of communities as well. But I think this is a little bit different because first of all, we know better, and second of all, we can do better. And so I'm really excited because this transformation is happening at the exact same time that there's this massive change in the clean energy movement as well. And so we can really align the two together. If you can go to the next slide. So we'll be able to see many benefits. It's community driven, as I mentioned. It creates jobs. It can improve renewable energy integration and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the largest emitting sector, as Lauren mentioned, the transportation sector. And it can also lower rates for all ratepayers by putting downward pressure on the rates and even benefit transit riders. So, you know, on Oahu, at least about 60% of all bus riders make less than $50,000. And so I think this really can target a specific portion of our population and also allow everyone to really essentially own an EV, which I'm really excited about. So if you can go to the next slide. One of the things that we're seeing too, which I'm really optimistic about, is that the market is moving in this direction as well. So even during the pandemic, when you know, people aren't moving around as much, we're seeing that when people do buy vehicles and register their vehicles, they're actually buying electric at greater rates statewide than internal combustion engines. Next slide, please. And so at the utility, we have a great opportunity to become a platform, a facilitator, and a leader in this transition, primarily in two ways, through infrastructure development and rate design. So we can deploy chargers work with third parties as a trusted advisor. And then as the video described, we're also focused on make-ready infrastructure. What I'm showing you in this slide is basically a work plan that we had established over the last year to really set the framework to determine what it is that what is our role in this space and what can we as the utility really offer to the community to help drive this transition forward. So actually, last week we filed some commercial rates, which would allow folks to charge, our commercial customers to charge, and make the price of charging competitive with gas fuel. Next slide, please. Some of you may have used our fast chargers as well. So we have about 20 fast chargers across the state in our service territory, and we're going to install, we have them in the books right now, we're going to install about 5 more before the end of the year. Next slide, please. And so like any transformation, we as the utility and we as the community have to be agile, learn quickly, pilot, and focus on scale. We at the utility have filed innovation pilot framework, which will allow us to move quicker than normally we're able to move. And so that's being reviewed by the commission right now, and we're really excited to see the community and the commission's reaction to that. And hopefully it'll allow us to kind of deploy some of these projects and learn quickly and get a little bit more traction. And then also, if you're wondering, hey, what can I do right now? One of the things that we're really laser focused on is the commercial make-ready infrastructure pilot. And we're in this process of designing that. And we're hosting a community meeting virtual on October 21st. And we really invite all of you to join us to help us design that program. If that in itself isn't enough, we're inviting a few special guests to speak. So the State of Hawaii State Energy Office, the City and County of Honolulu Office of Climate Change, University of Hawaii to share some of their research, as well as our partners at Hawaii Energy to share some rebate programs that they've been developing and deploying pretty rapidly. So with that, I'll pause and thank you for the opportunity to share what we've been up to lately. Thank you.
That's great news, Aki. Thank you very much for giving us a little insight on Hawaiian Electric. I would ask that you might consider as a utility, as we move forward to a greater mass adoption of electric vehicles and what that means in terms of grid response to charging requirements, is to revisit your current NEM and process barriers to rooftop solar adoption, which was a byproduct of some regulatory changes that occurred back in 2016, which the utility was primarily responsible for with PUC. I say that simply because we have a growing minority of EV owners that, like Noel and myself, that power our vehicles from the sun and not from the grid. And the more that we can get and advance EV adoption and do that in a way that minimizes the impact on the grid in terms of supplying energy, the better off we're going to be overall in meeting our climate and our other environmental objectives as a state. But thanks again for this presentation, very insightful. Our next speaker is from Kauai Island Electric Cooperative. As a cooperative, they've had a certain level of flexibility that a public company like Hawaiian Electric has not always had in terms of advancing clean energy and innovation in terms of the technology as a grid operator. They've been really a shining example of how the state can advance at a utility scale zero emissions electricity generation and storage. The utility's PV and Tesla battery farm exemplifies a low-cost, zero-emissions 21st century utility energy model that really is an excellent example of what can be done here in Hawaii on a larger scale. So our audience would like to know really how KIUC can help increase Kauai's EV adoption. And I've been told that right now that the current EV ownership on Kauai is the lowest in the state. So we look for the same type of innovation that's been applied in power generation and storage to advancing the EV infrastructure in Kauai. So Beth, could you give us some thoughts on what your cooperative is doing these days, please?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Bill. I'm really happy to be here today. And I'm excited to tell you that right now, the island of Kauai is running on 100% renewable energy. So it's always exciting to be able to say that. And pretty much any day when the sun is shining outside, we can say that we are running during daylight hours for several hours on 100% renewable. So I'm very happy to be here today. I want to give you basically an overview of what's happening on Kauai in terms of trends and some indicators in the EV space. So we can go to the first slide. I took data from the state's economic database to take a look at the growth in sales registrations of EVs over time since 2006. And you can see here the gray line is hybrid vehicles and the blue line is EVs. So there was very little activity until 2010, and then hybrids really took off. But looks like they've kind of peaked and slowed and are in decline since about 2017, while EV registrations continue to grow. We are at 364 registered EVs as of August. Next slide. This next slide is just going to give you a different look with just the EV registrations alone, so you can look at the growth. We're looking at roughly 30 to 50 new EVs per year being registered on the island of Kauai. And just to give you some context there, the total gas vehicles that are registered on Kauai as of August were 76,577. So we're at about 0.5% of total vehicles on Kauai are electric vehicles. Next slide. I wanted to give a shout out to Sonia Cass and her group, Kauai EV. They do amazing work in terms of advocacy and education. These are some pictures that Sonia sent me of two recent events that they had. One was an EV caravan where they visited some charger locations and an EV festival that they held. And they also partner with the county, KIUC, and others to hold ride-in drives at our Kauai Community College Farmers Market on Saturdays. We used to do that before COVID. And then also some educational sessions at KCC last year. Sonia was doing some classes and she was able to access some grant funds from KIUC. So we were really happy to support her in that effort, but very small group, but very powerful work that they're doing. Next slide. We've had some success working with dealerships here on Kauai, notably Aloha Kia and Kuhio Nissan. They do support the ride-in drives at KCC, bring a salesperson out and allow folks to drive the vehicles. So that's been a really nice partnership. KIUC has also worked with Nissan North America in 2018 and 2019. They offered a rebate promotion of $10,000 rebate for purchase of models of Nissan Leaf. And in 2018, I believe they were able to sell about 30 vehicles through that promotion. I wasn't able to get information from last year's promotion, but basically KIUC would promote it to our members and they had to be a member of KIUC and bring in a copy of their bill in order to access the rebate, but it was a really nice deal. I did make some calls this week to some dealers just to see what the market looks like right now. And one of them told me that there is still demand, even during COVID, but they have no supply. Basically, they are not able to get any vehicles on their lot. He said they're just being scooped up too quickly on the mainland. And so he has, I guess, unsatisfied demand on here on Kauai, which is disappointing. I don't know how that will resolve itself, but that is just some anecdotal information from some calls I made this week. Next slide, please. I also reached out to Ben Sullivan at the county because I wanted to capture what the county's been doing. They've been very active in working on getting more chargers. They've got 18 new level 2 chargers at their main offices at the Lihue Civic Center. 8 are for their fleet vehicles and 10 are smart chargers, presumably for the public. They're also transforming their light duty fleet as they can every year to replace their conventional vehicles with EVs, and looking, as is KIUC, following the market to look at the heavy duty vehicles. We don't have much of a fleet other than our heavy duty trucks, our line trucks. And so that, you know, the utility of those trucks is very, very important, as I'm sure you can understand, that we have to, you know, make sure that they are reliable. And so we're watching as more of those heavy duty vehicles evolve, as is the county. And then the county is also looking to support state legislation for EV ready provisions for new construction, so that the panel capacity is there in new construction for parking spaces that could be easily upgraded. Next slide. So I took this map from the EV Kauai website just to give you a sense of EV charging infrastructure that exists already on Kauai. It looks fairly robust, but we know that some of these stations are not operational. I'm sure that's not a problem specific to Kauai. I did also check in with the Hawaii Energy, Susan Tai Kaneko, on the EV charger rebate program to find out what's happening on Kauai. And she let me know that there were 2 level 2 charger rebates that were issued for a resort on our South Shore. One was a first time install and one was a retrofit. And then there are 2 more applications pending on Kauai, both on the North Shore. One is a resort that is looking for 2 level 2 retrofits, and one is a business that is requesting 2 first-time level 2 installations. So we're hoping that we're going to end up with more chargers out of that wonderful program. And Susan wanted me to also share that to date, there's about 53% of that pot of money, $400,000, that's available through the state. So they are still actively working to get that money out. And I think, as we all know, it's a statewide program, so any island could benefit. I just wanted to note, with that program, just before COVID hit, we were working with the county and Ulupono. We were each going to throw some money into a pot and supplement that statewide program for any Kauai applicants that maybe didn't make the cut or for whatever reason couldn't access those funds. COVID got in the way, but from KIUC standpoint, we're still talking to Hawaii Energy to see if there are Kauai applicants that they can't help. Perhaps we could provide some rebate monies for their installations as well. Next slide. So obviously there are impacts, talked just before I started about impacts to the grid and other impacts of transforming transportation. Obviously good things and challenges. On the positive side, of course, the reduced greenhouse gas emissions and potential load growth for our utility, and every utility is looking at that as a positive. But the challenges are really with that, you know, potentially significantly increasing demand on the grid, and then how do you manage it so that if it comes at times when you can handle it and keep up with any infrastructure upgrades that are needed. And this quote that I have on the bottom there, I took from a Power Magazine article, which was published in March. And I think it's really important to keep in mind. And so I'll just read it. Assuming 15 to 20% of all vehicles in a representative utility service area are EVs by 2030, and that the utility is somewhat successful at optimizing when and where EVs are charged, this is the best case scenario, we expect a 5 to 10% increase in energy demand, but a 25 to 33% increase in demand for grid capacity. So, you know, we have to look at, from a utility standpoint, you know, load growth, yes, but at what cost, and does it ultimately pencil out favorably to customers? We just don't know yet. Next slide. We do a survey every year. It's a membership. I'm sorry. This is a time of use pilot survey. Sorry. We did a pilot survey study on time of use in 2016 and 2017, and we signed up 350 volunteers under the premise of whether they would shift their energy usage to take advantage of lower energy pricing during non-peak hours. So for a year, those volunteers worked to shift to daytime hours as much as of their energy as they could. They were offered a 25% discount for the electricity used from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. The results were less than exciting. The average shift was 0.06 kilowatts per participant. So total among the group of 350, it was 21 kilowatts per day. And then, so that's about 1.5 megawatts on our peak of around 75 megawatts. So not a huge shift based on this time of use pilot study. We're glad that we did it, and we know it's not as easy as it may sound. And you know, a simple discount may not be sufficient, but just wanted to share that with you as some hard data that we do have. Next slide. So just future trends, and this is a very small sample of a survey that we did last year, but we do a membership satisfaction survey every year in the summer months. And the last few years, we've been adding on a few extra questions on a topic that we feel might be helpful to us in the future. In 2019, we asked about EVs, and there were a few questions, but what we learned from that survey was that only about 3% of the members that were surveyed said that they own an EV, and 60% of them said they have owned it for less than 5 years. We asked about charging habits, and most of them, 60% of them, say they usually charge at home, and 56% said they prefer to charge at home. Nearly all the members that were surveyed said they don't own an electric vehicle, so obviously the other 97%. And the reason they most often gave was because it costs too much to buy one. That was 32%, trailed by 18% who said they don't have a car, they don't need a car, and 10% said they have no interest in an EV. Next slide. So while 97% of the members said they do not currently have an EV, 15% said that they plan to purchase an EV. Among those who said they plan to purchase an EV, that 15%, 22% said that they would probably do so within the next 2 years. And so putting those numbers in context, 15% of those members would be about 5,000 members, and 22% of that number would be about a little over 1,000 members, possibly within the next 2 years. Given the historical uptick in registrations, that seems like a stretch, but that was what we got from the survey. And those who do not plan to purchase an EV or were not sure, we asked what would make it more likely for them to purchase an EV, and they said cost was the biggest factor at 25%. So I think that is the end of my slides, and hope that was helpful in sort of painting a picture of what's happening on Kauai.
Thank you so much, Beth. I really appreciate that. We're a little short on time, so I'm just going to get right into this. Our next presenter is from Hawaii County's R&D department. Riley, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, so with the, looking at clean transportation, clean mobility on Hawaii Island, we started looking at the population and our community and who and how we would get to 100% clean transportation. Considering our community, we looked at it, pretty much from a social equity lens first, because that is, are the people that would need to get to use this type of mobility. And 60% of our population is in poverty or ALICE. There's 22,000 registered businesses. 18,000 of those have no employees, with an average income of $25,000 to $50,000 a year. Pre-COVID, 38% of the workforce commuted more than 50 miles one way to get to work. The median income of Hawaii Island is about $56,000 a year, and the other counties are closer to 70 to 75,000 a year. So there's some unique aspects of that need to be considered with Hawaii Island. And so within government, as we approached the need to transform and the goal to transform, we looked at it's pretty much a broken system when it comes to transportation and mobility in government. It's normally vehicles are procured in a capital improvement plan. The vehicles are primarily acquired by siloed departments and used in the daytime, Monday through Friday. The access to the vehicles are siloed by departments. And what it ends up is that the system leads to holding on to vehicles just in case you need one. And so the operating and maintenance cost goes up as we have a large number of vehicles, 15, 20 years old, that we hold on to. And they remain parked to the point where the battery dies, and then we replace the battery and still not use the vehicle. And so the vehicles are, like I mentioned, primarily used Monday through Friday between 7 and 5 p.m. And so in moving forward with the solution, we needed to first look at how the vehicles are acquired. Should it be with CIP? And on the books, HRS 3641, there's a third-party performance contracting for public facilities that was in place. So last year, working with Rep. Lowen and Senator Wakai, we worked on a HRS 3642, which is a vehicle fleet performance contracting for vehicle fleet energy efficiency programs, which includes vehicles, vehicle fleets, fueling and charging infrastructure. Now, this allows third-party financing to actually acquire the asset needed to provide the mobility that the county needs. Key in this is that the contracts are awarded on qualifications, not on low bidder. So if you can actually analyze the scope and use of the vehicles and the charging and fueling infrastructure, you can base it on more on life cycle costs and long-term look at the vehicles. So this, I want to stress, covers both fuel source and vehicle fleet. Now, the other thing we needed to do is change the way the vehicles are used. So we're looking at a shared use across departments. We have had a pilot going on since 2013, where 5 Chevy Volts were used on a shared use basis. So currently we have an electric vehicle calendar that people sign up. So here in the West Hawaii Civic Center, we currently have 3 vehicles operating and 35 registered trained drivers across about 12 departments. And they get, the average county vehicle usually gets used about 2,000 to 4,000 miles. These vehicles get used over 10,000 miles a year. So you have a clean vehicle with more vehicle miles being used more often. And so they provide a savings of about $10,000 a year in fuel costs. The vehicles here are charged by our PV system, and so it's actually a renewable charging of the vehicles. Now, with the third party, assuming that the vehicle and vehicle fleets are owned by a third party, we would allow the share use to extend outside of county operating hours, which would mean they are available for the third party owner to rent at night and weekends and holidays. And so the weekends and holidays, that's on an election year, it's 117 days out of the year. And many of those are 3-day, 4-day weekends or whatever it is, or during the holiday times when there's a demand for rent-a-cars. So more cars rented would be rolling on a clean basis. And so that's a way to resolve some of the stagnant inventory of fossil fuel vehicles. Now with the fueling the vehicles, it would be through a lot of the problem with the advancement of EVs are siting charging stations. So the county in government has access to sites, and we have access to building renewable energy facilities at those sites. So we went through a load analysis. We're going through that with Hawaiian Electric, with the providing us the GPS locations of all the meters for the county. So we're consolidating that load physically versus by department, because we're finding there are certain park complexes where fire, police, parks, public works, environmental management, they all have meters there. And so if you consolidate the load, you have scale in which to make a PV renewable energy source of generation attractive. But we would build not only PV and storage, we would include electrolyzers, we would allow public charging stations, and being that it's a PV to battery to vehicle, we could do that on a DC basis, fast charging. Now, if there is a significant load at the facility, the battery system would be designed to carry not only the charging load of the vehicles, but also storage to offset the overnight load of the facility. So the investor would get a revenue stream from vehicle miles for the county's use, public charging. They would have a power purchase agreement for overnight purchase to offset the county load. And and I want to stress that we're using not only battery storage, but electrolyzer hydrogen production on those facilities. The unique approach that we're taking is that these facilities would be grid tied with grid support. So the battery could serve as reserve a certain capacity that is dispatchable and reactive power for the grid, which is also a potential additional revenue source for the investor. So in the third-party investment, they have a profile of different revenue streams that can benefit the investment. We are also looking with that is working with the community colleges and workforce development, because as the fleet transforms, whether the third party maintains it or the county maintains it, we still need talent and technology available on island for vehicle maintenance. The same approach we're taking with mass transit, that we need battery electric buses and fuel cell electric buses to handle the topography and distance challenges on this island. We are receiving our first hydrogen bus after the agreement is approved by County Council next week, Wednesday. It's a 29-passenger hydrogen bus that will operate within the Kona Waimea area. And we're having plans in 6-8 months to get another 220 passenger buses to operate on the east side. There's a fueling production facility that was part of a research grant that HNEI, Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, has built out over the past 5-6 years or so. And that facility is permitted and fully operational to produce the hydrogen. So with the mass transit, we're going through a fleet analysis on what should be or needs to be battery electric or fuel cell. With the county vehicles, we've done a full analysis over 631 vehicles. And I can pick any of those vehicles and have 3 options of what to replace them with in zero emission vehicles and get the life cycle costs. So the model is built out so I can say input based on set of priorities, 50 vehicles a year for the next 10 years. And it'll bring up the list of vehicles that are that should be replaced in the order of savings along with greenhouse gas impact based on the life cycle of the vehicle. So Now, back to the social equity thing. If we get the third party involved with the vehicle fleet, they, from my discussions with these folks, they want to turn over the inventory. So it would create a secondary market of used clean vehicles, which would have a lower acquisition cost. I got a BMW i3, 4 years old for $18,000. And so that type of secondary market would be there. In addition, with the access to the various charging stations, we would create like how SNAP has for food. We would have the shared use of the vehicle available for low, middle income people, folks to actually have access to these vehicles, to this inventory, and with discounted charging rates. So that's about all I have.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Riley. I just, because we are short on time, I just have a quick question for you. It's really impressive. You're looking at $10,000 annual savings per vehicle, per electric vehicle for the county. As one of the many taxpayers, we appreciate that. But what I'm curious about is, have you guys done the numbers in terms of maintenance savings on these vehicles per year?
In our vehicle inventory model, it includes the maintenance savings.
Okay, so that 10,000 is fuel and maintenance per vehicle. Okay, excellent.
And and it's a whole different technology. You know, you walk around with a tablet instead of a wrench. So.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you so much for that. We do appreciate that very much. We have a video coming up, which Ronnie, you might actually be interested in. It's electric buses in California. And I'm going to turn that over to Noel to drive that bus.
What seems to be a typical start of the school day procedure isn't typical at all in the Twin Rivers School District in North Sacramento. Just listen. That's the sound of an electric bus that rides so quietly, those 3 tones were added so people nearby would know a very large vehicle was approaching.
I drove this in San Francisco, and driving through San Francisco, people were very distracted. And I had a couple people almost walk right out in front of me, but the reason they didn't is because they heard that sound. And they looked up like, what was that?
Twin Rivers is the 27th largest school district in the state, but thanks to generous grants from energy commissions and air pollution control agencies, the district is on pace to have more than 40 electric buses in its fleet. That's more than any other district in the country.
So by the year 2021, we should be diesel-free, 100% alternative fuel. It's clean air for kids and clean air for the communities.
Electric buses are quieter because they're not burning diesel for energy. If you don't remember that old-fashioned school bus sound, here it is. Running on electricity also means the bus isn't creating exhaust to be breathed in by students, drivers, and mechanics.
There are carcinogens in diesel exhaust. The impact on greenhouse gas emissions, it makes sense from just, personal health and the health of the planet.
Nate Baggio is Vice President of Sales for Lion Electric, the leading manufacturer of electric buses. Lion has opened a bus experience center in Sacramento so other school districts can drop in to learn how they work and to determine if they're worth the investment. Up front, electric buses cost 2.5 times a traditional diesel bus, but Lion Electric and Twin Rivers say these vehicles eventually pencil out.
When you look at 80% less maintenance, 72% less in fuel costs, there's an economic argument.
Maintenance costs are tremendous on older buses and breakdowns and kids getting to school late. So with the electric bus, with the grant money, we're paying about $55,000 a bus. So that's how we can justify it. The return on investment is huge.
The buses are charged when not in use. A bright panel reminds the driver how much battery power and how many miles remain before needing another charge. The range for these buses is 100 miles. Driver Paul Harrison was on board with the new buses pretty quickly.
I was kind of a skeptic in the beginning, And once I got behind the wheel and started driving a bus, I say, wow, this is really nice.
Kids say they enjoy the quieter ride.
It's very comfortable, and we play music on the bus sometimes, and it gets very exciting.
And it turns out those three tones are pretty memorable.
Da-na-na. Me and my granny and my mom says that sounds like Christmas music.
Now you'd think drivers especially would be sick of those tones that ring when the bus is traveling below 15 miles per hour. Nancy, our guide this day, surprised us. Her ringtone shows just how excited she is driving a bus that's saving energy and cutting emissions.
The school bus industry has not done anything to innovate or change in the last 25 years. And here we get to innovate a little bit, and that's exciting, and I enjoy it. I am absolutely thrilled to be a part of it.
Wow, really exciting stuff. Our next concluding portion of our panel session here in today's webinar is really to talk about policy and politics, because they go hand in hand. And we're going to start with our next speaker, Melissa from Blue Planet. Melissa, please.
Great, thank you, Bill. Aloha, everyone. Can everyone hear my audio just fine?
Yes, fine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I really enjoyed that video and can't wait for us to collectively make a Hawaii version when we're celebrating our school buses converting to electric. So that'll be really exciting. And as Bill mentioned, I'll be kicking off this discussion to talk about policy. So you heard from my colleague Lauren earlier this morning, who leads our transportation program work. And my focus at Blue Planet as the Managing Director of Strategy and Policy is varied, but one of the really exciting things that I get to work on is our policy activities at the legislature and then also county councils. So I thought it would be a good time. This is a very complex topic. So I wanted to zoom out a bit and kind of look at the bigger picture and share a little bit about the power of policy in really driving the change that we need. So I'll provide a little overview of that, and I'll leave the politics discussion to our elected officials who will be joining just in a bit. So I wanted to just kind of put this discussion into a bit of context because many of the things that we're talking about, there really is a thread of policy change. We talk about the need to change individual behaviors, and that's certainly part of the equation. But meeting the climate challenge is going to take an unprecedented scale and pace, something that's never been accomplished in human history. And behavior change alone and really putting the onus on the individuals to adapt their lifestyle to get us out of the climate crisis isn't enough. And we really need policy and leadership to drive systems change. So if you go to the next slide, what's really fascinating about policy and what gets us really excited about this work at Blue Planet is that you can literally see the impact of policy. So what you see here is an image of the border between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So Haiti has a weaker policy on logging, and the Dominican Republic has a really strong anti-logging policy. So here's kind of a visual of the power of policy and this clear delineation between the two. You can really see the impact that policy can have. And here is another example that's probably quite familiar to all of you on the next slide. Today everybody wears seatbelts. It's just obvious. Nobody really thinks about it. But that wasn't always the case. So if you go back 40 years, only about 11% of people, just a little over 1 in 10 individuals actually wore a seatbelt. But then states started enacting laws that required seatbelt use. So, you know, as it started out as just a handful of states, and then that grew. And then this figure's a bit old, but from 2009, 85% of people were wearing seatbelts, and you know, that number is even higher today. So just one more example to really drive home this point that policy can be really powerful in kind of steering the landscape in the direction that we want and that we need. So smoking, this looks specifically at smoking rates in California. But if you look, go back to the 1960s, if anyone's seen the TV series Mad Men, you'll see that basically everyone in that series is smoking, and it's really indicative to kind of the social norms at the time. So almost half of people were smoking back in the 1960s, and that number dropped really substantially as more regulation came into place around, you know, where you could smoke and how close you could be to certain things, coupled with really this shift in social norms and social pressure, and a new narrative about smoking, and dropped pretty substantially. And today it's about at this 9% level. So similarly with transportation, a complex mix of kind of individual actors and individual behaviors, we have a real opportunity to, and real need to shift the way that we get around collectively through policy. So this snapshot is from Blue Planet's Clean Energy Report Card. And this is something that we release every few years. And it looks at transportation, but also other pieces of the energy landscape, renewable energy, energy efficiency. And unfortunately, year after year, transportation gets the lowest grade. And here's why on the next slide. We are seeing this trend of increased fossil fuel use in the transportation sector. This is a trend that has grown over time. Of course, with the COVID situation, there's been a deviation from this. But if we, you know, don't really have a plan and don't really use this opportunity to think differently about what the future could look like, we risk just reverting back to this same pattern. So in the time that I have remaining, I just want to highlight a few ways that Blue Planet is thinking about clean transportation policy. So a lot of the work that we do at Blue Planet, well, we do many things. We're a small team, but we do a lot of different things. We do community programs, we do engagement with youth, and then we also do policy work and really try to move the needle on this daunting climate challenge through each of those facets. So as we're thinking about transportation, it's something that we've been you know, talking about for a long time, and there's been some successes, but we still have a long way to go. Bill opened things up this morning and mentioned California's ban on sale of new gasoline cars by 2035. So we were really excited to see this because this is kind of it's an example of a vision that really matches the scale of the problem that we face. And interestingly, if you go to the next slide, this is actually something that that Hawaii has considered. So, you know, California stepped out in a leadership position here, but this is actually something that we've that has been on the table, and we hope will be on the table again in the future. So there were a number of bills introduced by our lawmakers in Hawaii that actually did the same thing. So committed to phasing out the sale of new gas cars by, and these bills were actually 2030, so a bit more ambitious than California. And just to clarify, just as the California order specifies, the ban is on new car sales, so it's not prohibiting people from owning a gas car or even purchasing a used gas car. So in part of the work that I mentioned that Blue Planet does, we really try to encourage the community, youth, and also just adults in our community to be part of the policy process. So this idea around, we've heard a number of folks talking about the 100% renewable energy target. We have a 100% renewable electricity target by 2045. In addition to this model of banning gas cars, we had also aimed to set a target for 100% renewable ground transportation by 2045 to match the electricity target, so that we would be planning in sync. So this is just an image from a rally that we held back in 2017. And then there was a bill just this past session resurrecting this idea. And I know Chair Lowen worked really hard on that, and it got quite far in the legislative session this year, although it was a really unusual year, and our legislators were balancing many difficult things. So this is something that we're hoping to see resurrected in the future. And then finally, I just wanted to take some time to think about and really speak to the context that we're in. You know, the path forward is, it's never been clear on climate, but it's even fuzzier in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, new refreshed conversations about systemic injustice. So at Blue Planet, we thought that this is a really important moment in our work collectively for with all of you, and then as a state. And we thought, we were really inspired by this word waypoint. And you know, waypoint, if you look at the definition, it's an intermediate point on a route, a point at which the course is changed. And we really believe that we're in this moment, as you know, dark as these times feel. We also see this as an unprecedented opportunity to create the future that we want. So we developed this Waypoints report, and you can access it at waypointshawaii.org. It's all online, and you can also download a PDF. But what we aim to do here is to think creatively about how do we move forward on climate while also fostering economic growth, creating new jobs, and addressing affordability and equity consideration. So we wanted to think carefully about what that could look like. So we came up with 50 actions across 7 different categories. On the next slide, I know this isn't digestible, but it just wanted to give a snapshot of all of the different actions. So these are things that either, you know, policy proposals or also programs that we could implement in the community across these 7 sections. And then 2 of them relate to transportation. So on the next slide, it's just a snapshot of some of the things that we're thinking about related to electric vehicles. I won't go through all of these, but highlighting a few, making EVs more affordable, you know, upfront. And also there's been a lot of conversation today about improving our charging infrastructure. I definitely echo the statements about expanding charging access. I have a Nissan Leaf and I live in an apartment building. So I rely exclusively on the public charging network to fuel up. So, you know, both improving access to charging in new construction and then also our existing building stock. And then another piece of this is the other part of the equation that Lauren started us off in. We also have another section about mobility and redesigning our communities around people instead of cars. So I just wanted to leave you with this. We really believe in the power of policy to drive the systems change that we need. And we want to connect all of you folks to that work. So please sign up to be on our email list and we'll help you engage in that way. All right, thank you so much.
Sorry, got it. Okay. I just thanked Melissa. I'll do it again really quickly. Thank you again for all the good work Blue Planet is doing and has done and will do in terms of the areas of climate, energy, and transportation on behalf of all of us here in the state of Hawaii. Job well done. Thank you. Our next presenter is Nicole Lowen. And I can say that I've known Nicole for several years, and I have been very pleased to say that she's been a strong advocate of the environment and the advancement of EV adoption within the state. So with no further ado, Nicole.
Aloha, thank you. So yes, and I think, Noel, you have my slides. I might go a little out of order. So yeah, my name's Nicole Lowen. I represent House District 6. I'm actually Bill's representative in Kailua Kona. And I chair the Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. I've been in office for 8 years, and I've been a member of that committee for all 8 years and chair for the last 2 years. So I thought, picking up from where Melissa left off, I'd just narrow down on some of the more specifics of the policy work that we're doing. And I actually think if you can go to the next slide, and then we'll come back to this one. I wanted to start by talking about some of the pre-existing work we've done and some of the existing policies that are already in place, and then look at some of what we've done recently, and then talk about what we need to do in the future. So first, as Melissa said, we have some ambitious goals in the state: 100% renewable energy by 2045. That was passed in 2014. And then in 2017, we also passed a bill that established a goal of reaching 100% zero emissions clean economy statewide in Hawaii. And so, fitting into the framework of this, in order to reach these goals, clean transportation clearly is a huge part of those goals, as well as concerns we have about addressing climate change, public health, and all the other things that are influenced by our transportation system. So I kind of put together a list of some of the policies already in place that influence EV adoption. One of this includes, I'm not quite sure, I threw this PowerPoint together really last minute. So one thing that's not on here I wanted to mention is the charging infrastructure has always been a big issue. So there is a rule in statute, a law in statute, that all parking lots over a certain size have to include EV charging stations. The city and county of Honolulu this past year added some EV-ready parking requirements for new construction to their building code. We've also had a procurement preference in statute for a long time that does prioritize vehicles that reduce dependence on fossil fuels. It's debatable how effective that has been. And then, other bills that are kind of peripheral. For example, we have the renewable energy tax credit that does not, it's not a tax credit for purchase of EVs, but for rooftop PV. But we think this is an important piece, since a lot of people right now, early adopters, are making the decision that it makes sense to purchase an EV because they can charge it at home, using the energy that they produce at home. So I became chair of the committee last year in 2019, and I've really focused in on a few specific topics that I've really wanted to prioritize and bring renewed attention to, and our transportation transition is one of them. So if you want to go back to the previous slide, and this is looking at some of the things we did in the 2019 legislative session. So one is that we established this EV charging station rebate program. So this provides substantial amounts for either the installation of a new EV charging station or the upgrade of an existing one. And we also are using this to try to help push for the installation of charging stations at multi-unit dwellings and in publicly accessible areas. So there's an aspect of equity to this bill as well. It's not a rebate for a parking stall that just benefits a few people. We tried to make sure that this was building out infrastructure in a way that's going to make the purchase of an EV a more attractive option for more people. We passed in 2019 House Bill 401. Riley mentioned this earlier. So this is just facilitating and authorizing the use of performance contracting for procurement of electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure. You know, this is a great tool for state and county to be able to move forward without a lot of upfront cost on this transition. And I think even more so now in the time of COVID, when we have so many financial challenges at the state level, looking at these kind of innovative financing tools becomes even more important. And then finally in 2019, the other thing I added to this list was that we did restructure the enabling statute for the Hawaii State Energy Office and brought some increased emphasis to the promotion and support of this clean transportation transition in that bill. So if you can skip forward a couple slides. And so coming into the 2020 session, again, we really wanted to continue with this really strong focus on the EV transition. And there were some bills that were, you know, top priority for me that did end up getting dropped because of everything that happened with the pandemic. One of these was House Bill 2699, and this set hard deadlines for the transition of all state fleets. It was kind of a state lead by example bill. And then in that bill, in addition, it set a statewide goal of 100% renewable transportation by 2045. That went all the way through, I think it made it all the way to the Ways and Means Committee on the Senate side, and then just got dropped because our focus had just shifted. You know, I think if we bring that back next year, we'll probably look at the California approach, which would just be banning the sale of ICEs by some set date, as opposed to establishing the goal where every vehicle in the state needs to be transitioned, which, you know, including the private sector, which is a little more challenging, I think, to implement. We also, you know, another bill that would have been priority last year would have been to just add continued funding to this charging station rebate program that we had established in 2019. That has been very successful. There's been a lot of uptake on using that, which is encouraging. And we think it's really important to continue funding that program, especially now that the structure of it is all in place, the applications are all in place, et cetera. So we're going to come back to that. Again, looking forward at 2021, there will be challenges with anything that, you know, has dollar signs attached to it. So, you know, we're going to have to really make a case for why that's really important. And then we also had bills moving. There were multiple bills introduced that would provide direct financial incentives for the purchase of EVs, like tax credit or a fee-bate. You know, I think these will be challenging in a difficult financial year, but we will go, you know, ahead with proposing it again anyway. And we did have one in 2020. This year, again, that fell by the wayside after when we knew what was going on with the budget and the pandemic. And then I think to continue to think about innovative ways of financing things is really important. So I had mentioned performance contracting. I think we need to continue to look at that, continue to build capacity within government to feel comfortable using performance contracting, because that has been a hang up. We've tried to do that with energy efficiency, and we need to come back to that again next year to ensure that our, you know, DAGs and our people at the state level feel comfortable with performance contracts in their capacity to, you know, execute them in a way that they're not worried there's going to be a pitfall for the state involved. We can also look at, we have the existing GEMS program, which helps to finance energy efficiency and clean and energy generation projects for low income or nonprofits or people who can't you know, do it in other ways and use other financing tools. So we can extend this to include EVs and EV infrastructure and potentially help use that structure of that program to leverage private funding. And then just looking at this list here, again, I kind of threw this together to keep me on track and give you guys something to look at. It's not super well organized PowerPoint, but, you know, I think infrastructure continues to be a big question. I think that to some degree, the private sector adoption, you know, there's not everything comes down to legislation. So there's not some, you know, place where we need to mandate every single detail of it, but I think continuing to have a role in making sure infrastructure continues to get built out and have incentives for that. And I think ensuring that there's some kind of equity consideration intertwined in that is important to make sure that EVs feel like an option for everyone, and not just people who can afford it or who already have PV on their rooftops. You know, coming back, looking at policy in the future, rental fleets are a huge part of the cars on our road, and that seems like a huge opportunity to work with the tourism industry. We talk a lot about sustainable tourism or how we want to come back from COVID and do things differently. And I think looking at bringing this transition, incentivizing this transition among our rental fleets is something that we should be looking at in the future. EV ready new construction, the city and county of Honolulu did finally pass something. I think it was a little more watered down than some people would have liked. And then for neighbor island counties, I think there's not much of a requirement in place at all right now for when we're building new buildings and new parking lots, that, you know, they're not building in the infrastructure up front necessarily to be ready for our clean transportation future. And then I think, you know, especially in light of the pandemic and the current situation we find ourselves in, that a focus on job creation, retraining, workforce development to ensure that people who've lost jobs due to the pandemic can find a place in, you know, our push for more clean transportation and renewable energy, and that they're trained for jobs in that sector. So I guess just to wrap up, I think it's important to remember, you know, why we're doing this. Climate change is, you know, an emergency. I think that we also need to remember that it's not a black or white proposition. It's not like we have to do everything or there's no point doing anything. I feel like sometimes people lose hope about climate action, and I think it's important to remember that there are shades of gray and matters of degree, and that everything that we do matters and influences the future. And so we have to, you know, look at each thing we do in light of that, and help inform how important we think it is when we talk to other policymakers, like that maybe aren't as on board with some of these measures as myself and Senator Ruderman. There's, you know, the public health factors, and then the economic factor. The more that we transition to clean transportation powered by energy produced here in the islands, the more dollars that we are keeping in our local economy, the more self-reliant we are, the less vulnerable we are to disruptions in the global economy. Yeah, I think it's just important to, as we move forward, keep those big picture reasons why in mind. So with that, I'm getting messages that my time is up. So thank you all. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Always a pleasure. And I'm sure we're going to have some questions in our chat question format, which is going to be following this panelist for you. Our next and concluding presenter is Russell Ruderman, Senator Russell Ruderman from District 2. Russell is, you could say, a part-time senator, but he's definitely a full-time EV owner and advocate. And we are sadly to report that he is retiring from the Senate this year, and we will miss his voice in the Senate. So with that, I'd like to say, Russell, please tell us how we can make this work going forward in the legislature.
Well, thank you very much, Noel, and everybody for putting this together and being part of it. All the wonderful advocacy. I'm going to skip rather quickly through the first couple of slides. I think everybody here knows why, and how is what I hope to contribute a little bit to. And what I have to say is just, you know, some of the pieces to the puzzle, certainly not all of them. And I'm not going to touch on things like electoral action, which, you know, it's just the wrong season for right now. But I'd like to talk about just political advocacy. By that I mean citizen advocacy to the legislature or to councils or to Congress. The reason I wanted to focus on that is I want to make us, those of us fighting for these things, more effective. And the reason I think I might have something to say is because I've been on both sides of it. Before I was an elected official, I was a sign carrying, letter writing protester. And I've been on both sides, and, you know, I've gotten to see a little bit about what works and what doesn't, you know. So these are the four main subjects. If we could go to the next slide, I'll start talking about organizing and why it's so important. I can't emphasize enough the importance of organizing. And by the way, congrats and kudos and thank you for, that's exactly what we're all doing here and what Noel and the Big Island group is doing with expanding statewide. Organizations are important to get the attention of the legislators in so many ways. To start with a very practical way, when we sit in a committee and hear testimony on a bill, it's grouped into 3 categories. First is government agencies, then organizations, and then individuals. And so it puts you in a whole different category. And when you submit testimony as an organization, or when you go and advocate or speak to a legislator, they usually have no idea how many people are in your organization. So they have to take you seriously because they don't know how many people. The nice thing is, by organizing, we will find allies in every district around the state. And that's so important because when we need to go try to convince, let's say, the chair of a finance committee, for example, to pass something that isn't in her nature, she needs to hear from people in her district, not people from way over here on the Big Island calling saying you should do this because, on a certain level, he or she won't care about that. They have to care about their own constituents. So ideally, as an organization, we say, okay, you folks in Pearl City, call so-and-so. You folks up in Waianae, call so-and-so. And they're hearing from people in their own district. And that's a reach that the organization can do. Another thing is, I'll talk a minute about tracking legislation. Nobody is naturally good at that. It's not easy, it's not intuitive. But if you have an organization, and I mentioned the Sierra Club here because they've been very good at it over time, you can have 1 or 2 people who are the point person for tracking legislation. And it's their job to say, okay, our bill on electric vehicles is coming up next Tuesday. We need testimony into such and such place by Friday. And they can be on top of that, and they can send an email to everybody in an organization who certainly won't all be tracking that legislation. And then we can all send in individual testimony as well as preparing the group's testimony. So it's a logistical thing. It's a prioritization difference. And also let me remember to say that it's important for your own spirit and motivation to be reminded that you're not alone and to get the support that comes with working with like-minded people. So it's very important to prevent burnout for yourself as well as your effectiveness. I think we can go on to the next slide. So tracking legislation, I'm not saying we have the best legislature in the country, but we actually have the best citizen website for our legislature, I think, in the country. And we also have something called the Public Access Room that helps everybody figure it out if you need any help. I think of them as the librarians. Our website is very, very good once you learn how to use it, and you can sign up for notifications on bills on specific subjects, specific keywords from certain legislators. And once you're tracking a bill, you can sign up for alerts so that this bill's coming up for hearing again next Tuesday. You need to know about that. We have a 3-day period, sometimes just 2, in which you can submit testimony. Give me a second, okay? And so I think that brings me to my next slide. I'm sorry, can I go one further slide down, please, and we'll come back here. This part about timing it properly at the bottom and targeting it properly. You can provide input to us legislators at any time of the year as your opinion. But when a bill gets scheduled for a hearing, then you can provide testimony. Testimony has a legal status. It becomes a permanent part of that bill's record. It's available to everybody who gets to vote on it. Testimony is worth about 1,000 times what a letter in the middle of July with your opinion on it is. So it's really important to be able to tune into that process and be able to submit testimony rather than just opinions. So if you can target it properly, and that's when the point person who's tracking legislation can make that happen. While I'm on this slide, a couple of important things. If you're a constituent of the person you're talking to, let me back up a minute. The people with all the power in the legislature are the chairs of committees. So oftentimes you'll be writing to a chair of a committee rather than your own personal legislator. If you are that person's constituent, or if we have an ally that we're going to get them to write, it's very important that you say, I'm your constituent. Make that known. And going to the first point there, be brief, state your position up front. Really, the subject line or the first sentence should say, I'm your constituent and I want you to vote yes on electric vehicle legislation 101. Because a lot of times they won't read past that point. They won't have the time, or to some it doesn't matter. They may just be counting emails. So state that position up front and make your constituency known. I like to sometimes jokingly say, if you're not their constituents, don't mention that. But if you are, be sure to mention it. It makes a really big difference. Of course, we care about everybody, but we're obliged to care a whole lot more about our constituents. Go back up one slide, please, Noel, if you would. So the relationships, again, if they're your legislator or you can find someone in their district, it's great. Politics is surprisingly personal. You get to know them and it's worth it. They will respond differently to people once they know you. I want to emphasize this bottom point, to be respectful and polite. That goes in general, but also to work with the staff. A lot of time you won't get to talk to the legislator on the day or the week that you want to. And they'll say, can you talk to can you explain this to my legislative aide? Please don't ignore that opportunity. The staff does, in my opinion, the heavy lifting. They're valuable and they're meaningful. Work with the staff. And the part about being respectful and polite, this is more important for people in my district of Puna than elsewhere, but I know what it's like to be angry at your legislators and to want to vent. And if you need to write a venting letter or email, or an angry one, write it and then throw it away. And then write another one where you're speaking to the person respectfully, because your goal is not to vent. Your goal is to change their mind or their outcome. And lastly here, to learn their positions and motivators. And in that regard, I just want to say that it's useful to understand what will make them care about it. Probably everybody on this call cares about the environment, for example, and we do things because we care about the environment. That's not true of everybody. This is a cold reality, but it's very real. But they do care about some stuff. They care about economics. They care about what are other states doing? What other people have been successful? What will I look bad if I don't do? And of course, they care about public pressure and public input. No one wants to be embarrassed publicly, and no one wants to be the bad guy publicly. So there are things they care about. I think you'll be wasting your time to tell them how important climate crisis is. I don't think, present company accepted Nicole, who is a true environmentalist. I don't think very many of them care. I'm sorry, they just don't care, but they care about politics. And so you need to reach them on that level. That's my main points for now. I know I'm trying to wrap it up. I want to thank Melissa for mentioning my phase out of internal combustion engines for sale by 2030. I think that was my bill you're referring to, was this year or last year, which didn't even get a hearing. And someday when there's more time, I want to say the humorous response I got from the auto dealer's lobbyist who told me I was trying to end his industry. Funny that California has somehow thought along the same lines, and we don't think it's ending a whole industry. But anyway, I want to thank you all. I'll try to stick around for questions. Thank you for tolerating my cynicism at times, but I'd rather tell you what I think does work and doesn't work so that we can be more effective. Thank you,
Well,
Noel, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Russell, for not sugarcoating it. This is what we needed to hear. And good point about your first line or first paragraph. You're for or against a piece of legislation, or you're recommending an action, because they don't like to read down past that first paragraph. So get your points in up front if you want to make a difference. Now we're moving to beyond the panel session to our Q&A, and I am just as guilty as everybody else. We've run a little bit over on this, so we're going to have an abbreviated session in the next 10 minutes. So forgive me and the rest of us if we're not being able to get your question live answered, but we will submit those questions that have been directed to individual panelists for after the event, and they can communicate with you directly in terms of trying to address your concerns. So having said that, let's move right along here. There is let's see, I'm going to try to, because we're short on time, just sort of put these questions out to the panel that are general questions as opposed to specific individual questions to individuals, because I think they represent a larger segment of the audience. And this one is, as a homeowner in Oahu and an EV owner, is there a plan to add homeowner solar systems to the grid to help absorb the increase? And I believe that the electrical production from homeowners is already established to support future demand. Anybody?
Hi, I was gonna, this is Aki from Hawaiian Electric. I'm not sure if there's I mean, I guess I have a question to the question, which is, what do you mean by a plan? I think, you know, homeowners have the opportunity to install rooftop solar, and that can, and storage as well, and that can be integrated with EV charging. So
I guess perhaps the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and it's not always a straight line for the homeowner, the solar installer, to get through the permit process in a timely fashion. And when you add the complexities of storage with solar and then a vehicle on top of that, it even gets more complicated. I know that from firsthand experience here on the Big Island. So perhaps that's where they were headed, is if we can look at streamlined processes from the utility side, that would certainly be helpful. And we have to work with the counties, which is outside of your control and our control, to further streamline the process as well. Okay, let's see. Let's just, for Blue Planet, what does the clean transportation look like? And I think we sort of covered that, but maybe we can elaborate on that a little bit. Anybody? Blue Planet, Melissa?
I think I covered that pretty thoroughly in my presentation, and I don't want to take up precious question time.
Well, here's a good one. What do you see as barriers to the solutions which Blue Planet is advocating, and how do you address them, those barriers?
I think we also answered that question. There's policy barriers, there's funding barriers, barriers of stigma and exposure. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I'm not picking on you, but those are the questions that are coming up here on the board. Okay. I think this is Hawaiian Electric. My solar array produces about twice what I use. Most of the excess is going to HECO as a stock company at no cost to them. I'd rather subsidize my neighbors and shareholders. Can this organization support a public buyout of HECO? Well, that's really not really for Hawaiian Electric. I'm sure you're not advocating public buyout, but it's an interesting question that a lot of us that are on NEM programs are basically any excess power that we happen to generate is free to Hawaiian Electric, whereas in, say, California, you actually get a credit for that excess power that you're offsetting otherwise utility costs for power production. But certainly, if anybody
maybe
wants
I
to
can,
talk about that.
Unless Aki, you want to take this.
You can take it, Representative Sloan.
I mean, I think that the excess power question depends on how you're contract with HECO, how your interconnection agreement is, because there are different programs out there, so it just depends. But Hawaii does have, legislatively, we don't allow wheeling, so you cannot legally sell electricity to your neighbor. The reason for this is because we have monopoly utilities. We don't have, multiple utilities that can import, export with each other like they do on the mainland. So it gets complicated pretty quickly. It's something, we have introduced bills that comes up every year. We continue to grapple with that question, but I think it's always more complicated than the way that question is framed. Number one. Number two, the question about becoming a co-op. Back when the NextEra deal was on the table, there was a lot of talk about establishing a co-op on Big Island. And I think there was a lot of support around that. And we actually commissioned a study that is available. You have to go look it up about, different models of utility ownership. And I think, there could be potential for that in the future on Big Island, but the reality is there's not a willing seller. There's not a buyer that has the capacity to purchase a utility, the capacity to run it, the ways of financing it. So, just to be totally frank about it, I don't think that is realistic in the near future. I don't see that happening.
Very good. I think that we also heard from Hawaiian Electric that there's some plans for time of use pilot for EV owners in terms of getting benefits on aligning their charging schedule with that of the grid excess capacity. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we actually currently have time of use rates. So we have a e-bus tariff for electric buses, and we've seen we've seen that the time of use rate has been effective in that respect. And also even on our two other rates, EVU and EVF, which are primarily supporting the fast chargers, or I think Noel called them superchargers. We've seen just through the usage data that the time of use rate has been effective and people are being influenced by the market signals. The commercial rates that we just filed also have a pretty significant time of use rate and also a lower demand charge to incentivize commercial customers. So anyone who's thinking about transitioning their fleets or multi-unit dwelling, owners, those type of customers who are interested in putting in infrastructure, that would make it financially feasible for them to be doing that as well.
Great. I do have one other question for you as a follow-up. Are there any efforts towards vehicle to grid in terms of Hawaiian Electric, accommodating vehicle to grid? That is to provide power to the grid on on-demand basis for load balancing purposes, et cetera, and getting a credit for that as a vehicle owner.
Yeah, I think that's the direction that we hope to head. That's in our EOT, Electrification of Transportation roadmap. Technologically speaking, for vehicle to grid, we're still kind of evaluating it. We did the Jump Smart Maui project on Maui, and there's currently, small kind of piloting efforts going on in that respect. I think before we get into full-blown vehicle to grid, we'll probably focus more on vehicle to home or vehicle to building. So kind of baby steps there, but ultimately, I think that's the direction that we would certainly like to go. And I saw Ben's question about technology supporting time of use rates as well. From my perspective and from the company's perspective, we want to make it as easy and as kind of intuitive for customers to make what we would call the right decision to choose clean transportation options. And so if it's technological solutions that can do that, absolutely, I think that would make a lot of sense.
Great. I think we're just about out of time on the Q&A side. So I'm going to turn this over to Nanette and to wrap up today's webinar. And I want to thank everyone for your time and participation, both our presenters and our audience. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill. And thank you again to all of our speakers. It's really exciting to hear what's going on, not only on your own island, but statewide to further clean transportation. And I'm excited to hear, how all of your strategies and your plans will affect EV adoption. I also want to thank the Hawaii EV organization again for putting both of these webinars on last weekend and this weekend. I think they're very informative, and we're really hopeful that all the attendees learned something about EVs in Hawaii. To learn a little bit more, we've got our website up there on the screen, hawaiiev.org, and we've got a lot of resources on there, including benefits of driving electric, tips on how to buy an EV, whether it's new or used, charging, and all the latest EV news in Hawaii. And please follow us also on our social media channels. We've got Facebook, Hawaii EVA, Instagram, and as well as Twitter. We'll also be posting the recorded videos from this seminar on YouTube. So we'll let you know when those are going to be up. So we were supposed to have prize giveaways and like a little section on that, but I actually just pulled some winners, and I'm gonna go ahead and share, I'll put in the chat too, who those winners are. We've got prizes from Blue Planet, from Tesla Hawaii Club, Nissan, and Plug-in America. And we want to thank them all for donating prizes to us. And we've also got a $25 Amazon gift card. So we've got 2 grab bags that include stuff from all of those organizations, plus the Amazon gift card. And the 2 winners that have already been pulled are Kent Bullard and Keith Neal. I'll write that in the chat there. So you will be receiving an email from me about claiming your prize, and congratulations to both of you. So to finish up here, we're going to show a video that Blue Planet put together in Drive Electric Hawaii, and it actually features EV owners talking about why they love their EVs.
What do I love about my EV? I love my EV because I get to drive in the HOV lane. It's fast and quiet. I love it.
I love my EV because it doesn't pollute the air.
It's easy to maintain and it's comfortable.
Because it's powered by the sun.
Because it has video games.
The cheapest car I've ever owned and good for the environment.
This is the perfect car for an older person on a limited budget.
Then runs off of the cheaper and cleaner energy.
I can refuel by plugging into my photovoltaic system.
It doesn't pollute the earth.
And with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Bill, do you have any final words?
I just want to thank everyone again, our presenters. We have done this on an all volunteer basis, and so it's not Hollywood, but we did our best, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar. Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Until we Zoom again.